Greetings, friends. My name is Oscar. It is the 15th of March, 2021. How are you all doing? I don't really have any updates today, but I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been bugging me in game design criticism. Not necessarily game criticism. Game design criticism is these video essays. And I'm talking specifically about like video essays that like focus on like broad strokes over the nitty-gritty elements of game design and how that just rubs me the wrong way. First up, this is a little bit of pixel art I drew. I was just going for a little bit of a Mother 3 palette. I've been thinking a lot about the GBA, Game Boy Advance, and it's got a 3:2 aspect ratio and a really intriguing like resolution. I think I might do a video in the future about the GBA and the pixel art. They're like really good pixel art that you can find on there. But let me know if that's something you want to see. But yeah, I wanted to talk about kind of YouTube essays that are almost always like about big philosophical approaches to game design. And I think that's because they're usually written by people who don't make games. And that doesn't mean they're bad. Like, I enjoy a lot of them. I think there's something that can make me like think about game design in a different way. But that's coming from someone who maybe has some kind of fundamental lessons like learned or fundamental ideas in place on how I think games should be made. They can help you focus on game design, but they're more about making a game great and not making it good, and kind of put those in like quotes, like great and good. And what I mean by that is I think a game needs to be good before it can be great. You know, people will say, oh, shoot for the moon, land among the stars. But in video games, it's more like shoot for the moon and then miss and then get a 2 out of 10 because your game was kind of had a bad tutorial or was buggy or unplay tested or something, you know? I think it really comes down to a difference between top-down and bottom-up design, right? Criticism naturally leans towards being top-down, and it focuses on like a thematic hypothesis and then uses mechanical examples in the game to justify that. Like, bottom-up is kind of how all design truly starts, as like the thematic elements of a project can't really become nuanced until there is that solid foundation that can be tweaked, added to, and, most importantly, subtracted from. Like, video essays rarely comment on what wasn't in a game's design, probably because they don't really know, because they, one, aren't designers, and two, weren't there. Like, there's not that transparency in video games that you can really see what wasn't, or what was taken away, right? You can see what isn't there, but you can't see what was there and then removed for whatever reason. GDC talks by developers, I think, are the closest thing you could see to that bottom-up criticism by someone who is, like actually there, knows what they're talking about, but then doesn't have that luxury of being able to distance themselves from something and just read it entirely without their intentions kind of like clouding it. So like they can tell you like the decisions that see elements removed from a game in the way that how like a really cheesy jazz musician might tell you something like, listen to the notes that they weren't playing, Like, critiquing what wasn't present in a game's design can sometimes be more helpful to designers than anything else, I think. And I mean that like it can be more helpful to people who are like aspiring designers as well as people who are wanting to hear about, what did you think of my game, right? I can count on like one hand the amount of videos I've seen that focus on the small details or lack of small details in games that make them what most people would call playable. Like I think people take these things for granted a little bit too often. And I don't know if that's because these people making video essays don't realize these decisions are being made, in a game's design, or if they just don't think that they're interesting enough or that they can talk about them. I think things like appropriate game feel, right? Where, you can put as much Screenshake, particles, rumble, whatever in a game, and that will just not work. You can just overdo, game feel. Invisible tutorials, things like the Mega Man X tutorial, which I'll kind of bring up later, but the way that teaches you to play the game without you realizing it. Perceivable consequences being like when you how far ahead you can understand what's going to happen, how far ahead you can predict things you're about to do, and whether or not like it was a decision to kind of obfuscate some of that. I think these kind of lessons become second nature if you study any kind of design, but game design specifically, and they become these just like inherent things that you'll get a feel for how you think they should be done and what you think the appropriate level of something like Screenshake might be. I think the broad strokes that these video essays tend to focus on can be great focal points for a project, especially if you need to like rally people around your vision if you're working in a team. But I think they're rarely something that you'll instinctively incorporate into every game. They're not that useful in a wide range of situations. They're more useful like if you're saying, oh, we're making a game about the feeling of adventure. It's like, okay, great, we understand that, and we can talk about how Zelda has these big the big mechanics of Zelda help you feel like you're going on an adventure. It's like, well, that's not really helpful though if we were making a Batman game. It's not about that. I think they're more like circuit breakers that can help you when you have to make those kind of hard decisions in a game. It's like, all right, are we making a game that is about this, or are we making a game that is about this? Are we making a game that is this mechanic going to make a point, or is this mechanic just there to feel good and be fun, right? The problem with that, the problem with using them and thinking of them in that way, right, is that most hard decisions in game design are the fun parts of game design. They're the parts that everyone thinks they have an answer to, right? All these video essays, right, and a lot of critiques of games, right, come from a perspective of the person going from top down, thinking about what this game was trying to achieve. I think I know how I could have done it better. So every person already thinks they have the answers to this. They're fun to muse on and kind of think about different solutions to. So beginner designers won't learn from them anyway. The small details that make a game good are what most people should focus on, not the overall philosophy that makes them great. The reason there aren't a lot of video essays about these like little details, I think, is because they're generally more processual, they're more bottom up, and I think they require a hell of a lot more examples to prove. I think all these things that you usually need a lot of experience to be able to explain, right? And I think you also need a lot of design literacy to be able to stay awake for. And I don't mean to be condescending when I say that, but when you're talking about like affordances, right? Like affordances are something that maybe people, they need to kind of like understand the concept of affordances before they can understand how they're applicable to to every game, all right? Whereas most people have a concept of what the feeling of adventure is, but the problem is the feeling of adventure is only applicable to games that are trying to elicit the feeling of adventure. So I don't know, I hope that kind of makes some sense there. I didn't want to give any like specific examples of like either games that people should be focusing on or design that people should be focusing on, because that would just kind of, well, it might just date this video a little bit, but also it might just come off as a little bit pretentious, like, well, everyone should be playing Braid or something like that. And also I don't want to give examples of like bad examples of like, oh, well, this YouTuber is just, doing the wrong kind of criticism. Because like I said at the beginning, I do enjoy just very top-down, light explorations of the thematics of a particular game. I think that's interesting, but again, you just need that like base of the knowledge of how to actually get to the point of like, all right, I need a foundation to build those thematics on top of. But what I will leave you with is a reading list and a watch list. So the first one, I think, is a book that maybe people have heard of. It's called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It's just sort of like an industry standard, like textbook that you should read. Don Norman is a guy with like years and decades of experience, right? And there's a lot in this book for, I think, everyone, both kind of designers, right? The designers that really want to go like data driven, they want to do play testing, they want to go like what is going to be optimally fun at all times. And then there is stuff in there that's more anecdotal, and for the kind of person who wants to just go, like design from like a gut instinct. I think that's probably why it's so popular and so enduring. So definitely go pick this one up. It'll teach you a whole bunch about, just generally in terms of game design, like affordances and things. The revisited and expanded edition, or just whatever the latest edition is, has sections and elements in there for UI and UX and more digital design. It's quite an old book. So yeah, go and pick up like the latest edition if you can. The next one is sort of the opposite of that, and is almost the book example of a video essay. I don't know, what would you call a video essay that didn't have video? It'd be just an essay. But joking aside, this book is kind of the opposite of an essay, actually. It's not really an essay. It's more like one of those, it's 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. It's a small, very tiny coffee table book that weighs next to nothing, and it almost presents itself in the way of those daily affirmation books where you just flip to any page, read the thing, and then move on with your life. What I think is really great about it is that the things in it are broad enough that they can be applied to all different types of design disciplines, right? Not just architecture, not just product design, but game design, like video design, like audio design, anything. I think there's a lot in here that people can learn. And I think that there's a humor to it, and like a simplicity and an unpretentiousness that is really refreshing when it comes to design. People seem to take design very seriously. Like I take it very seriously, but this book will kind of like loosen you up a little bit. It's a good palate cleanser after you've read a whole bunch of Don Norman Design of Everyday Things. What's great about this book is that it also has small sections that'll just be like humorous lessons on how to not be a dick or humorous observations on how to avoid that like Dunning-Kruger effect of thinking you know a lot more than you actually do. Maybe I'm doing that right now, who knows? But there's just little anecdotes from people. There's one that I really love that was, I love a view, but I want to sit with my back to it. And I just think that's great. Just a great quote. It's just one page. That's all it says. And then there are other things in there that just explain like how you should know your discipline well enough to be able to explain it without advanced terminology that your grandmother might not have. So if you can't explain your game or your project to your grandmother in words she can understand, you don't know it well enough. You need to go and think about it a little bit more. And I think that's applicable to everything, not just architecture. So don't be fooled into thinking this is just something for level designers or 3D designers or something. This is a book with philosophy and just small techniques in there that I think can really help everyone in design. The next thing, I've just got a watch list of a few different people. The first one is probably an obvious one, but it's the Sequelitis series by Egoraptor, also known as Aaron Hansen, who went on to form Game Grumps. Very talented video game player and a very astute kind of like observer of like what works and what doesn't work in video games. His video on Mega Man X is sort of legendary as just being a great breakdown, just like piece by piece, of what makes the first like 45 seconds of that game just a masterstroke in game design and wordless tutorials. Go and watch it. I don't need to like go on about it. It's only like 10 minutes long, but yeah, it's really fantastic. Next up is Tom Francis. Tom Francis does videos kind of similar to what I'm doing here, where he will just sit down on the couch for 25 minutes and just talk about a game design thing he's been thinking about. I think it's really interesting. I think sometimes he probably goes back and goes, oh, why did I say that in that video? But it's just maybe something he's musing on at the time, and it can really make you think. Yeah, that's kind of it. I think they're really interesting. Do listen to those ones with headphones, maybe. It's kind of annoying because they're not really interesting to watch because it's just him sitting there talking, but he doesn't boost the audio sometimes enough. So unless you've got like some big speakers, you're going to need some headphones. The Art of Screenshake by JW, formerly of Vlambeer, the now defunct Vlambeer, rest in peace. This is a great video, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. It's quite old, but it's just him talking about like elements of game feel that he's used in a lot of his games. What I wanted to kind of put it on this list for was that I talked before about like appropriate game feel, and I think it's interesting to watch that video, having played a whole bunch of his games and having played like things like Minute now, right? Which was a game that was quite different to a lot of Vlambeer games, and kind of realize the things that he kind of goes through in that video and says like, we do, you know, Screenshake, we do big bullets, we do this kind of thing, you know. It's interesting to look at the things that he leaves out of his games now, and then sort of go back and ask yourself, like, just as like a little design lesson for yourself, go like, why did he leave that out? If he said it was such an important part of game feel, you know, 7 years ago or whenever he did the video, why is he not doing it now? Or why did he do it in this game but not this game? I think that's a really interesting way of kind of discerning the difference between like game feel and appropriate game feel. The next video is a series of videos by Rasputin, Gaming for a Non-Gamer. These are pretty popular, I'm sure you've heard of them. They're just a really interesting way of looking at how like games are read by someone with little to no gaming literacy, right? It's Rasputin, his wife. If you don't know the videos, his wife plays through a whole bunch of popular games like the Breath of the Wild, Celeste, and sort of just, he comments on the things that he found interesting that she didn't pick up on or didn't just instinctively know how to do. I think they're just interesting videos, and I think they're the kind of videos that I'm hoping will start to become more popular, the videos that I'm pining for by making this video. And then finally is Thomas Brush. He's a YouTuber, video game indie developer, and his channel just covers almost every aspect of indie game creation. It's this like holistic, like great little devlog. And what's really interesting is watching him talk about, you know, a game at the beginning and the design inception and the big broad ideas that we've been talking about. And then as he goes through and talking about these nitty gritty things, so he's like, oh, look, this broad idea that I had at the beginning maybe isn't working at this point, or I had to rethink it in a way because of this one tiny thing, you know. And I think that's really interesting. It can make you, just on a critical level maybe, even if you're not uninterested in making games, realize the myriad of different decisions that will have to be made in a game's development. Yeah, so there you go. Thomas Brush, he's great. I would listen to anything he says at any time. Not necessarily take it all on board, but definitely someone to listen to. And yeah, that kind of brings it to an end. I don't want to drone on. I think I've been going for a while now. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. You're loved, you're appreciated. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.